They say trust is earned, but in the corporate world, sometimes trust is the very thing that destroys you. I'm Jessica Martinez, I'm 31 years old, and 6 months ago I thought I had found my dream job at BrightPath Marketing Solutions here in Phoenix. I was wrong. What I actually found was a snake in designer heels who would steal my work, manipulate my boss, and try to destroy everything I'd built. But here's the thing about snakes. They're only dangerous when you don't see them coming. And once you do, well, let's just say the desert is full of predators. But only the smart ones survive. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The Phoenix sun was already blazing through the floor-to-ceiling windows of BrightPath Marketing Solutions when I arrived that Tuesday morning in September. I loved getting to the office early, before the phones started ringing and the chaos of client calls began. There's something peaceful about an empty office, the way the light hits the glass conference rooms and the soft hum of computers coming to life. I had my usual routine: large coffee from desert grounds, check emails, review project timelines, and prepare for whatever fires needed putting out. I'm not someone who naturally stands out in a crowd. I'm 5'4" with shoulder-length brown hair that I usually keep pulled back in a practical ponytail. I prefer comfortable flats to heels, and I've never been one for office politics or playing games. What I am good at is work. Real work. The kind that requires staying late to perfect a campaign strategy, or spending weekends researching target demographics until my eyes burn from staring at spreadsheets. Maybe it's because I'm the daughter of a retired high school teacher who drilled into me that excellence isn't negotiable. Or maybe it's because I've had to be excellent just to survive. 3 years ago, my ex-husband decided that supporting his wife's career was too much responsibility and left me with divorce papers and a mountain of debt. Since then, it's been just me and my mother, Carmen, who's been battling early-stage dementia for the past 2 years. The medical bills alone would crush most people. But I've made it work through pure determination and the kind of meticulous planning that most people find exhausting. Every dollar has a purpose. Every project has to count, and every opportunity has to be maximized. That's exactly why the MedTech Innovations account meant everything to me. BrightPath Marketing Solutions isn't exactly a household name, but in the healthcare marketing world, we've built a solid reputation over 8 years. We're the agency that medical practices call when they want to reach patients without sounding like a pharmaceutical commercial. We handle everything from dental clinics trying to attract young families to wellness centers marketing to busy professionals. But medical devices? That was uncharted territory, and everyone knew it could either make or break our expansion into the bigger leagues. David Richardson, our founder and CEO, had been chasing medical device companies for 3 years without success. The industry is incredibly regulated, the budgets are massive, and the stakes are higher than anything we'd handled before. When MedTech Innovations finally agreed to consider us for their Health Connect campaign, it felt like winning the lottery. This wasn't just another client. This was our shot at joining the elite tier of healthcare marketing agencies. The Health Connect device was revolutionary, a continuous glucose monitor designed specifically for young adults with type 1 diabetes. Unlike the bulky, medical-looking devices on the market, this one was sleek, discreet, and actually stylish. More importantly, it connected to a smartphone app that turned diabetes management into something that felt less like a medical burden and more like a lifestyle choice. The potential market was enormous, but reaching young adults meant abandoning traditional medical marketing completely. That's where I came in. 2 years earlier, I'd attended the Southwest Healthcare Marketing Conference in Scottsdale, one of those industry events where everyone wears name tags and pretends to enjoy networking over mediocre hotel coffee. I was presenting a case study about our campaign for a diabetes education nonprofit, showing how we'd use social media to reach teenagers who were typically resistant to medical messaging. The presentation went well, but what mattered more was the conversation afterward with Maria Rodriguez, the VP of marketing for a small medical device startup I'd never heard of. Maria was different from the usual healthcare executives. She actually listened when I talked about authentic patient storytelling and the power of user-generated content in medical spaces. We spent an hour discussing how traditional medical marketing talks at patients instead of with them, and how the most effective health campaigns feel like conversations between friends rather than lectures from doctors. She took my card and said something I'll never forget. "If we ever get big enough to need real marketing help, I'm calling you first." Fast forward 2 years, and that small startup had become MedTech Innovations, with Maria as their VP of Marketing and a budget that made David's eyes light up like a kid on Christmas morning. When she reached out specifically requesting that I lead the Health Connect campaign, I knew this was my moment, not just for the company, but for me personally. Success with this project would mean a promotion, a raise, and the financial security that would let me focus on taking care of my mother without constantly worrying about money. The project brief was ambitious. Create a comprehensive digital marketing strategy that would launch Health Connect to the young adult diabetes community, build brand awareness, drive pre-orders, and establish MedTech as the innovative leader in diabetes technology. The budget was $8 million over 18 months, which was more than double our typical project size. The timeline was aggressive. 4 months to develop the complete strategy with implementation beginning in January. I threw myself into the research with the intensity of someone who knew their entire future depended on getting it right. I spent weeks analyzing social media behavior patterns among young adults with chronic illnesses, studying successful medical device launches, and developing relationships with diabetes advocacy groups and patient influencers. I interviewed dozens of type 1 diabetics between the ages of 18 and 35, learning about their daily challenges, their relationship with technology, and most importantly, how they wanted brands to communicate with them. What emerged was a strategy that felt revolutionary, at least in the conservative world of medical device marketing. Instead of focusing on the device's technical specifications or emphasizing medical benefits, we would treat Health Connect as a lifestyle product. The campaign would center around real patient stories, but not the typical before and after testimonials that make people feel like medical case studies. These would be authentic, unpolished moments. A college student checking her glucose levels between classes, a young professional managing her diabetes during a work presentation, friends at a restaurant where diabetes management was just another part of the evening. The centerpiece was an influencer partnership program unlike anything the medical device industry had seen before. Rather than partnering with medical professionals or traditional health influencers, we would work with young adults who happened to have diabetes but were primarily known for other things: fitness enthusiasts, food bloggers, travel photographers, tech reviewers. The message was subtle but powerful. Diabetes doesn't define you, and the right technology can make it almost invisible. I developed a proprietary tracking system using advanced spreadsheet modeling that could measure patient engagement across multiple platforms, correlate social media activity with pre-order behavior, and provide real-time campaign optimization recommendations. It was complex, technical, and exactly the kind of innovation that could establish BrightPath as a leader in data-driven healthcare marketing. By November, I had created what I genuinely believed was the most comprehensive and innovative medical device marketing strategy I'd ever seen. The presentation deck was 63 pages of research, strategy, creative concepts, and detailed implementation timelines. Every recommendation was backed by data, every creative concept was supported by patient insights, and every timeline was carefully coordinated with MedTech's product launch schedule. I was proud of it in a way that probably seems silly to people who don't live and breathe marketing strategy. But this wasn't just work to me. It was proof that I belonged in this industry, that I could compete with agencies twice our size, and that my years of dedication and sacrifice had been building towards something meaningful. What I didn't realize was that someone else had been watching my work very carefully, taking notes on every breakthrough, and planning to claim it all as her own. Ashley Chen had joined BrightPath 6 months after I started, hired as a marketing coordinator with an MBA from Arizona State and an impressive portfolio of internships at larger agencies. She was everything I wasn't: tall, polished, effortlessly confident in meetings, and gifted with the kind of social intelligence that made clients remember her name. She wore designer clothes that I couldn't afford, drove a luxury car that seemed impractical for Phoenix heat, and had the kind of network that only comes from growing up with money and connections. From the beginning, Ashley made it clear that she saw our small agency as a stepping stone to bigger things. She talked constantly about her connections at major firms in Los Angeles and New York, dropped names of executives she'd met during her MBA program, and had a way of positioning herself as the obvious choice for any high-profile projects. David seemed charmed by her ambition and impressed by her confidence, often assigning her to client presentations and industry events where BrightPath needed to make a strong impression. I didn't mind. I've never been someone who craves the spotlight, and I was genuinely focused on the work itself rather than the politics surrounding it. Ashley was good at client relations and presentation skills, areas where I knew I had room for improvement. It seemed like a natural division of labor. I would handle strategy development and campaign creation. She would manage client relationships and business development. For 2 years, this arrangement worked smoothly. We collaborated on several successful campaigns, with me developing the strategic foundation and Ashley handling client communications and presentations. She was always generous with praise for my work in team meetings, and I appreciated having someone who could translate my detailed analysis into the kind of high-level messaging that impressed clients. But something changed when the MedTech project began. At first, it was subtle. Ashley started asking more detailed questions about my research methodology, requesting copies of my interview transcripts and data analysis. She explained that she wanted to better understand the strategic foundation so she could represent it more effectively to the client. It made sense, and I was happy to share. Collaboration makes everyone stronger, and I wanted the project to succeed more than I cared about individual credit. Then she began scheduling separate calls with Maria Rodriguez, ostensibly to coordinate meeting schedules and handle administrative details. Again, this seemed logical. Maria was busy, and having someone manage the communication flow would help me focus on strategy development. Ashley assured me that these were purely logistical conversations and that all strategic discussions would include me. By October, Ashley was attending client meetings that I wasn't invited to, explaining that Maria had requested one-on-one updates to streamline communication. She would return from these meetings with feedback and requests that seemed to perfectly align with the work I was already doing, which I took as evidence that the strategy was on the right track. Looking back, I can see how carefully she was positioning herself. Every email to the client was copied to David, highlighting her role in managing the relationship. Every success was framed as the result of her client management skills, while challenges were presented as strategic complexities that required her intervention to resolve. She had a gift for making herself appear essential while making my contributions seem like background work that anyone could do. I was so focused on creating the best possible campaign that I missed the warning signs completely. I trusted her because she had never given me a reason not to, and because I couldn't imagine someone being calculating enough to systematically position themselves to steal credit for months of work. The first real red flag came in early December, during our final strategy review meeting before the client presentation. Ashley, Maria, David, and I were sitting in our main conference room, reviewing the completed campaign strategy. I had spent the previous week polishing every detail, ensuring that the presentation told a cohesive story from market research through implementation and measurement. As I walked through the strategy, highlighting the innovative influencer approach and the proprietary tracking system, I noticed Ashley taking detailed notes in a way that seemed unusual. She was writing down not just key points, but specific phrases, terminology, and even my explanations of the technical aspects. When I mentioned the tracking system I'd developed, she asked me to explain the methodology in detail, claiming that David had requested a more thorough understanding of our analytical capabilities. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. After the meeting, Maria pulled me aside and said something that should have been a clear warning. Jessica, this strategy is exactly what we were hoping for. I knew when I requested you for this project that you'd understand our vision. I'm looking forward to working with you directly during implementation. The emphasis on you directly felt pointed, and I wondered if there had been some confusion about team roles. But Ashley quickly joined our conversation, smoothly redirecting the discussion toward timeline and logistics, and the moment passed. That afternoon, Ashley stopped by my desk with coffee and her brightest smile. "I think that went incredibly well," she said, settling into the chair across from me. "Maria seems really impressed with the strategy. You should be proud of yourself." "Thanks," I replied, though something in her tone felt slightly off. "I'm just glad she's happy with the direction." You know, Ashley continued, stirring her coffee thoughtfully, I've been thinking about the presentation next week. Since I've been managing the client relationship and David really values my presentation skills, maybe it would make sense for me to take the lead on delivering the strategy. That way, you can focus on answering technical questions if they come up. I looked up from my computer, surprised. I assumed I'd be presenting, since it's my strategy. Of course it's your strategy, she said quickly. I'm not suggesting anything different. I just think the presentation itself is more about relationship management and big-picture communication, which you know is more my strength. You're brilliant with the details, but sometimes I think you get too focused on the technical aspects instead of the business impact. The comment stung because it touched on an insecurity I'd always had about my presentation style. I did tend to get caught up in explaining methodology when executives probably just wanted high-level results. And Ashley was genuinely better at the polished, confident delivery that impressed clients. I guess that makes sense, I said, though something inside me was screaming that this was wrong. But I should still be there to answer questions about the research and the tracking system, right? Absolutely, she assured me. We're a team. I'll handle the presentation, and you'll be there for all the technical details. It's the perfect division of responsibilities. I agreed, but that night, I lay awake, feeling unsettled in a way I couldn't quite identify. Something about the conversation felt manipulative, but Ashley's reasoning was logical, and I didn't want to seem petty or territorial. I told myself that what mattered was the success of the campaign, not who got credit for presenting it. 3 days later, I would discover just how naive that thinking had been. The morning of December 15th started like any other. I arrived early, reviewed the presentation one final time, and prepared for what I expected to be a collaborative meeting where Ashley would present the high-level strategy while I provided detailed explanations and answered technical questions. The client presentation was scheduled for 10 a.m., giving us time for a quick team review beforehand. At 9:30, I knocked on David's office door, expecting to find Ashley already there for our pre-meeting discussion. Instead, David looked up from his computer with a confused expression. Jessica, what can I do for you? I'm here for the pre-meeting review before the MedTech presentation, I said, equally confused. What pre-meeting? He asked. Ashley and I just finished reviewing everything. She's already in the conference room setting up for the call. My stomach dropped. She's setting up for the call? Yes. The client presentation starts in 20 minutes. Ashley's been managing this relationship from the beginning, and she's prepared an excellent overview of the strategic approach. I'm really impressed with the work she's done on this project. I stood there for a moment, trying to process what I was hearing. David, I think there might be some confusion. This is my strategy. I developed the entire campaign approach, the research methodology, the influencer program, everything. Ashley was supposed to help with the presentation, but the strategy itself is my work. David's expression shifted from confusion to slight annoyance. Jessica, I understand you contributed to the research and analysis, but Ashley has been leading this project from a client management perspective. She's been in constant communication with Maria Rodriguez, and she's the one who's been keeping me updated on progress. I think you might be overstating your role here. The words hit me like a physical blow. Overstating my role? I had created every single element of this campaign strategy. The research, the insights, the creative approach, the tracking system, all of it was my work. But somehow, in David's mind, Ashley had become the project leader, and I had been reduced to a research assistant. David, I can show you the timestamps on all my files, the research interviews I conducted, the spreadsheet models I built. This entire strategy came from my work. I'm sure your research was valuable, he said, his tone suggesting that this conversation was over. But right now, I need to focus on delivering an excellent presentation to our biggest potential client. We can discuss project roles and responsibilities later. I walked to the conference room in a daze, my hands shaking as I tried to understand how the narrative had been so completely rewritten. Through the glass walls, I could see Ashley arranging papers and testing the presentation technology, looking perfectly calm and confident. When I entered the room, she looked up with a bright smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Jessica, perfect timing. I was just getting everything set up. This is going to be great. Ashley, I said, keeping my voice as steady as possible, I think we need to clarify something. David seems to think you developed this strategy. Her expression shifted almost imperceptibly, a flicker of something cold crossing her face before the smile returned. Well, I have been managing the client relationship and coordinating the project development. I think David just recognizes that I've been the primary point of contact with MedTech. But the strategy itself, the research, the campaign approach, that's all my work. Of course you contributed to the research, she said, her tone taking on a slightly patronizing quality. And I've made sure David knows how valuable your analytical work has been. But you have to understand, Jessica, that strategy development involves much more than just research. It requires client insight, business understanding, and strategic thinking at a level that goes beyond data analysis. The implication was clear. I was good enough to gather information, but not sophisticated enough to transform it into real strategy. It was a perfectly crafted put-down, designed to make me question my own capabilities, while positioning her as the strategic visionary. At exactly 10 a.m., Maria Rodriguez's face appeared on the conference room screen, and I watched Ashley transform into the confident, articulate project leader she had convinced everyone she was. For the next 45 minutes, I sat in silence as she presented my strategy, my research, and my innovative approaches as her own work. She was brilliant at it. Every insight I had developed through weeks of patient interviews was presented as her understanding of the target market. The influencer program I had designed was described as her innovative approach to medical device marketing. Even the proprietary tracking system was explained as her solution to measurement challenges in healthcare campaigns. When Maria asked technical questions about the tracking methodology, Ashley smoothly deflected them to me with phrases like, "Jessica can walk you through the analytical details," and "I'll let Jessica explain the technical implementation." I was relegated to the role of data analyst, brought in to explain the mechanics of systems that Ashley was taking credit for designing. The presentation was a complete success. Maria was enthusiastic about the strategy, impressed by the innovative approach, and ready to move forward with implementation. As we ended the call, she made a point of praising Ashley's strategic vision and thanking her for developing such a comprehensive campaign. "This is exactly the kind of thinking we were hoping for," Maria said. "Ashley, I'm really looking forward to working with you on implementation. You clearly understand our brand and our market in a way that most agencies don't." After the call ended, David was effusive in his praise for Ashley's performance. She had delivered the presentation flawlessly, handled questions with confidence, and secured what would become our largest client account. In his mind, she had just proven herself as BrightPath's rising star and our best hope for expanding into medical device marketing. I sat there listening to their conversation, feeling like I was watching my career dissolve in real time. Months of work, my most innovative thinking, and my shot at advancement had just been stolen so smoothly that even I was starting to question my own memory of events. That afternoon, alone in my office, I opened my project files and began documenting everything I could remember about the development of the MedTech strategy. Every conversation, every email, every timeline detail that might prove my role in creating the campaign. I didn't know what I was going to do with the information, but some instinct told me that I needed to preserve the truth before it disappeared completely. I had no idea that this documentation would eventually become the foundation for Ashley's complete destruction. The silence in my apartment that evening felt suffocating. I sat at my small kitchen table, staring at my laptop screen where my project files were still open, trying to make sense of what had happened. The numbers on my spreadsheets blurred together as my eyes filled with tears I refused to let fall. Outside, the Phoenix skyline glittered against the desert mountains, beautiful and indifferent to the fact that my career had just been shattered by someone I had trusted completely. My mother was in the living room, watching her evening news program with the volume turned up too loud. Carmen Martinez had been a high school English teacher for 32 years before her retirement, and even now, with her memory starting to fade in and out like a radio losing signal, she maintained the same daily routines that had structured her entire adult life. News at 6, dinner at 7, reading until 9. The consistency helped her navigate the increasing confusion that came with her condition, and I had built my own schedule around maintaining that stability for her. "Mija?" she called from the living room, using the Spanish endearment that had been my name for as long as I could remember. "You're very quiet tonight. Everything okay at work?" I closed my laptop and walked to the living room, settling onto the couch beside her. The familiar weight of her hand patting my knee brought a comfort that I desperately needed. My mother had always been able to read my moods with the supernatural accuracy that comes from decades of managing teenagers who thought they could hide their problems from the world. "Just a long day, Mom. We had a big presentation today. Did it go well?" she asked, though I could see in her eyes that she was already starting to drift away from the conversation. Some days she was completely present, sharp and insightful as ever. Other days, like today, she moved in and out of clarity like someone walking through patches of fog. "It went perfectly," I said, and technically that wasn't a lie. The presentation had been flawless. Ashley had delivered my strategy with confidence and skill, securing the biggest client in our agency's history. The fact that she had stolen everything I had worked for was a detail that would only confuse and upset my mother. "That's wonderful, honey. I'm proud of you." She squeezed my hand, and for a moment her eyes focused completely on my face. "You work so hard. Sometimes I worry you work too hard." The simple kindness in her voice broke something inside me that I had been holding together all day. I leaned against her shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of her lavender lotion, and finally allowed myself to feel the full weight of what I had lost. It wasn't just about the project, though that hurt more than I wanted to admit. For 4 months, the Health Connect campaign had been the center of my professional universe. Every morning I woke up excited to dive deeper into the research, to refine another element of the strategy, to solve another piece of the complex puzzle of reaching young adults in a meaningful way. The work had felt important, not just for my career, but for the thousands of young people who would benefit from better diabetes technology and more authentic health communications. Now all of that passion and innovation belonged to Ashley in the official record. When the campaign launched and inevitably succeeded, her name would be associated with the breakthrough thinking that could reshape medical device marketing. Industry articles would profile her as a rising star who understood how to bridge the gap between healthcare and lifestyle marketing. Speaking opportunities, job offers, and career advancement would flow to her because she had positioned herself as the creator of my ideas. But the professional implications were only part of what kept me awake that night. The financial reality was much more immediate and terrifying. I had been counting on the promotion and raise that would come with successfully leading our biggest project. The extra money wasn't for luxury or lifestyle improvements. It was for my mother's increasing medical expenses and the long-term care planning that we both knew was inevitable. Carmen's dementia was still in the early stages, but the progression was steady and predictable. In the past 6 months, I had watched her struggle with tasks that had once been automatic, forgetting appointments, losing track of conversations, becoming confused in familiar places. The neurologist had been clear about what lay ahead: more medical appointments, eventual need for specialized care, and costs that could easily overwhelm our current budget. I had calculated everything down to the dollar. The promotion to senior marketing strategist would mean a salary increase of $22,000 annually, plus performance bonuses that could add another $15,000 in a good year. That money would cover the premium for long-term care insurance, allow me to hire help for the days when my mother needed more supervision than I could provide while working, and create a small emergency fund for the inevitable crises that come with chronic illness. Without that promotion, I was looking at a future where every medical emergency would become a financial catastrophe. I could continue managing for now, but the gap between what I earned and what we needed was growing wider every month. The stress of that math had been driving my determination to excel on the MedTech project, and now the solution I had been working toward for months had been stolen by someone who had no idea what desperation actually looked like. The next morning, I arrived at the office early as always, hoping to find some normalcy in my familiar routines. The building was nearly empty, just security and the cleaning crew finishing their work from the night before. I made my coffee, checked my emails, and tried to focus on other projects that needed attention. But every time I looked toward the conference room where Ashley had presented my strategy, I felt a sick twist in my stomach that reminded me how completely my professional world had shifted overnight. Ashley arrived at her usual time, looking perfectly composed and radiating the confident energy of someone who had just scored a major career victory. She stopped by my desk with coffee and a smile that seemed genuine, though I was beginning to question my ability to read her true intentions. "Good morning, Jessica," I wanted to thank you again for all your support on the MedTech presentation yesterday. I know David was really impressed with how smoothly everything went. You're welcome, I replied, keeping my voice carefully neutral. I wanted to see how far she would push the narrative that positioned her as the project leader. I've been thinking about next steps for implementation, she continued, settling into the chair across from my desk like we were collaborators planning our shared success. Maria mentioned wanting to move quickly on the influencer outreach, and I think we should probably set up a meeting to discuss timeline and resource allocation. The casual use of we was masterful, implying collaboration while simultaneously establishing her ownership of client communications. It was exactly the kind of subtle manipulation that had allowed her to steal credit so effectively, and I realized that she planned to continue the same pattern during implementation. Actually, I said, I'd like to schedule some time with David today to discuss my role on this project going forward. Something flickered across Ashley's face, too quick to interpret, before the bright smile returned. Of course. I think it's great that you want to stay involved with the analytical aspects. Your research skills are really valuable to the team. The phrase analytical aspects felt like a deliberate diminishment, reducing my comprehensive strategy work to data collection and number crunching. But I simply nodded and turned back to my computer, signaling that the conversation was over. At 10:30, I knocked on David's office door and asked if he had a few minutes to discuss the MedTech project. He gestured to the chair across from his desk, though his expression suggested that he was already impatient with whatever concern I planned to raise. David, I wanted to clarify my role on the Health Connect campaign going forward. Since I developed the core strategy and understand all the technical components, I'd like to take the lead on implementation planning. He leaned back in his chair, studying my face with the kind of expression that managers use when they're about to deliver unwelcome news. Jessica, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but I think there might be some confusion about project ownership here. Ashley has been managing the MedTech relationship from the beginning, and she's the one who developed the strategic approach that impressed the client. That's not accurate, I said, trying to keep my voice steady despite the surge of panic I felt at hearing my work attributed to Ashley again. I can show you documentation of my research process, the interview transcripts, the original strategy documents with my name and timestamps. Ashley helped with client communications, but the strategy itself came entirely from my work. David's expression shifted from impatience to something closer to annoyance. Jessica, I understand that you contributed research and analysis to this project, and that work was valuable. But strategy development involves much more than research. It requires understanding client needs, business objectives, and market positioning at a level that goes beyond data collection. The implication stung because it echoed exactly what Ashley had said the day before. Somehow, she had managed to plant the idea that I was capable of research but not sophisticated enough for strategic thinking. The narrative was so perfectly crafted that David seemed to genuinely believe it, despite the fact that he had seen my strategic work on dozens of successful projects over the past 3 years. I've been developing marketing strategies for this agency for 3 years, I said, my voice rising slightly despite my efforts to stay calm. The diabetes nonprofit campaign, the wellness center rebranding, the medical practice social media strategies, those were all my strategic work, not just research. Those were smaller projects with less complexity, David replied dismissively. The MedTech campaign required a different level of strategic thinking, and Ashley demonstrated that she could operate at that level. I'm not trying to minimize your contributions, but I need you to understand that there's a difference between research support and strategic leadership. I sat there staring at him, realizing that Ashley had not only stolen credit for my work, but had somehow convinced our CEO that I was incapable of the strategic thinking that had been the foundation of my career. The rewriting of my professional identity was so complete that David seemed genuinely confused by my claims of ownership. Going forward, he continued, Ashley will continue leading the MedTech implementation, and you'll provide research and analytical support as needed. I think that's the best use of everyone's skills and the approach that will serve our client most effectively. I left his office feeling like I had been erased from my own career. In the span of 24 hours, I had gone from being the strategic architect of our biggest project to being relegated to the role of research assistant on my own work. Ashley had managed to steal not just credit for the Health Connect campaign, but my entire professional identity within the agency. The rest of the week passed in a blur of routine tasks and mounting dread. I watched Ashley take meetings about implementation planning, communicate directly with Maria Rodriguez about timeline and budget allocation, and position herself as the strategic expert on medical device marketing. Every conversation reinforced the narrative that she was the visionary behind the campaign, while I was merely the person who had gathered supporting data. By Friday afternoon, I was ready to accept that I had lost this battle completely. Ashley was too skilled at manipulation, David was too convinced by her version of events, and I was too exhausted by the emotional weight of fighting for recognition that should have been automatic. I began updating my resume and researching job opportunities at other agencies, though the prospect of starting over somewhere new felt overwhelming when I was already struggling to manage my mother's care needs. That evening, I was cleaning out my desk drawers when I found a folder I had forgotten about, my documentation from the early stages of the MedTech project. Inside were printed copies of my original research notes, email exchanges with diabetes advocacy groups, and the handwritten sketches I had made during my first brainstorming sessions about influencer partnerships. At the bottom of the folder was something that made my heart race. A signed letter from Maria Rodriguez, sent to me personally 3 weeks into the project. The letter was brief but specific. Jessica, I wanted to thank you for the innovative thinking you're bringing to our campaign development. Your approach to authentic patient storytelling is exactly what we were hoping to find in a strategic partner. I'm looking forward to seeing how these concepts develop into the final campaign strategy. I read the letter 3 times, feeling something shift inside me from despair to determination. This wasn't just a polite thank you note. It was documented proof that Maria Rodriguez viewed me as the strategic architect of the campaign. The letter was dated, signed, and clearly identified me as the source of the innovative thinking that had impressed the client. For the first time since the presentation disaster, I felt like I had some power in this situation. Ashley might have convinced David that she was the strategic leader, but she couldn't rewrite the paper trail that proved my role in developing the campaign. The question was whether I had the courage to use that evidence and risk everything on a confrontation that could either restore my reputation or destroy what remained of my career. That weekend, I spread all my documentation across my dining room table: research interviews, email threads, strategy drafts, timeline notes, and Maria's letter. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Every major element of the Health Connect campaign could be traced back to my work, with timestamps and correspondence that told a clear story of development and innovation. My mother wandered into the dining room on Saturday morning, looking at the papers with the curiosity that still surfaced during her clearer moments. "What's all this, Mija?" "Work stuff, Mom. I'm trying to figure out how to handle a difficult situation." She picked up Maria's letter, reading it slowly with the careful attention she still brought to written words. "This woman thinks very highly of your work." "Yes, she does." "Then why do you look so sad?" I explained the situation as simply as I could, watching her face as she processed the story of stolen credit and workplace manipulation. Even with her cognitive challenges, my mother had taught teenagers for 3 decades and could recognize dishonesty and power dynamics with uncomfortable clarity. "So this Ashley person took your work and is pretending she did it?" "Essentially, yes." My mother was quiet for a long moment, studying the papers on the table. When she looked up, her eyes were sharp and focused in a way that reminded me of the teacher she had been for most of her adult life. "Jessica, I raised you to be kind and generous, but I never raised you to be a doormat. Sometimes in life, people will try to take advantage of your good nature, and when that happens, you have to decide who you want to be. Do you want to be the person who lets bullies win? Or do you want to be the person who stands up for what's right?" The question hung in the air between us, carrying the weight of all the lessons she had taught me about integrity and self-respect. I looked at the evidence spread across the table, thinking about the months of work that Ashley had claimed, the promotion I had lost, and the financial security that was slipping away from my family. "I want to be the person who stands up for what's right," I said. "Then you know what you have to do." That night, I began preparing for a confrontation that would either restore my career or end it completely. I organized every piece of evidence into a comprehensive file, created a timeline of the project development process, and drafted a detailed explanation of my role in creating the Health Connect strategy. I also did something that would prove crucial in the weeks ahead. I started researching Ashley's background and professional history, looking for any information that might help me understand how she had become so skilled at manipulation and credit theft. What I discovered would change everything. Ashley's LinkedIn profile painted a picture of steady career progression and impressive achievements. But when I dug deeper into the details, inconsistencies began to emerge. Her previous position at a Los Angeles marketing firm had lasted only 8 months, despite her claims of major client wins and strategic leadership. When I reached out to former colleagues through professional networks, I began hearing whispers of familiar patterns: brilliant presentations of other people's work, strategic credit for collaborative projects, and a talent for positioning herself as the architect of team successes. More disturbing was what I learned about her departure from her previous agency. According to a former colleague who agreed to speak confidentially, Ashley had been quietly asked to leave after a client complained that strategic work they had commissioned from a senior strategist had actually been developed by a junior team member. The agency had avoided a public scandal by allowing Ashley to resign voluntarily, but the incident had created enough industry awareness that she had been forced to relocate to Phoenix to find new opportunities. I was not Ashley's first victim. I was simply the latest in a pattern of credit theft and career manipulation that she had been perfecting for years. The realization was both infuriating and empowering, because it meant that my experience was not an isolated incident, but part of a documented pattern that could be exposed and stopped. Armed with this knowledge and my comprehensive documentation, I began planning a strategy that would not only reclaim credit for my work, but ensure that Ashley could never victimize another colleague in the same way. The plan was risky and would require perfect execution, but for the first time since the presentation disaster, I felt like I had a path forward that could lead to real justice. Monday morning, I arrived at the office with a new sense of purpose. Ashley was already at her desk, reviewing what appeared to be implementation plans for the Health Connect campaign, my campaign that she was continuing to treat as her own creation. She looked up as I passed, offering the same bright smile that had once seemed friendly but now felt like a mask hiding something much darker. "Good morning, Jessica. How was your weekend?" "Very productive," I replied, and for the first time in days I meant it. The game was about to change, and Ashley had no idea what was coming. The coffee shop on Camelback Road was nearly empty at 7 in the morning, just the way I preferred it for important conversations. Desert Grounds had become my refuge over the past 3 years, a place where I could think clearly away from the office politics and constant interruptions that defined my workday. The barista knew my order by heart: large dark roast, no sugar, extra shot of espresso. I needed the caffeine more than usual today, having spent most of the night rehearsing the conversation I was about to have with Lisa Thompson. Lisa had been my closest colleague during her 3 years at BrightPath, the kind of person who could read the subtext in client emails and navigate office dynamics with an intelligence that I deeply respected. When she left 6 months ago to join Desert Digital, one of Phoenix's most prestigious marketing agencies, I had been genuinely happy for her advancement, even though I missed having an ally in the daily workplace battles. Now, sitting in our familiar corner booth, I was hoping that friendship and professional respect would be enough to convince her to help me with the most important gamble of my career. She arrived exactly on time, looking polished and confident in the way that comes from working at an agency where your talents are properly recognized. Lisa had always been sharp, but there was something different about her now. A sense of authority and ease that suggested she had found her professional home at Desert Digital. We exchanged the usual pleasantries about Phoenix weather and holiday plans, but I could see in her expression that she knew this meeting was about more than catching up. "So," she said, settling back in her chair with her vanilla latte, "I'm guessing this isn't just a social coffee. What's going on at BrightPath that has you looking like you haven't slept in weeks?" I had practiced this conversation in my head dozens of times, but sitting across from Lisa, I realized that all my careful planning couldn't prepare me for the vulnerability of admitting how completely I had been outmaneuvered by someone I had trusted. Taking a deep breath, I began telling her about the MedTech project, Ashley's systematic manipulation, and the presentation where months of my work had been stolen so smoothly that even I had begun to question my own memory. Lisa listened without interruption, her expression growing more serious as I described the way Ashley had positioned herself as the strategic leader while reducing me to a research assistant. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window at the desert landscape that surrounded our city like a beautiful, unforgiving barrier. "I wish I could say I was surprised," she said finally, "but Ashley pulled similar moves when I was still at BrightPath. Nothing as blatant as what you're describing, but she had a way of inserting herself into successful projects and making sure her name was associated with the wins." "Why didn't you ever say anything?" "Because I couldn't prove it, and because she was careful never to target me directly. Ashley's smart enough to pick her victims strategically. She went after you because you're talented enough to create work worth stealing, but humble enough not to fight back aggressively. The assessment stung because it was accurate. I had always prided myself on being collaborative rather than competitive, focused on the work itself rather than the politics surrounding it. Those qualities had served me well in most situations, but they had also made me an ideal target for someone who understood how to exploit generosity and trust. The thing is," Lisa continued, "what Ashley doesn't understand about this industry is that talent always surfaces eventually. You can steal credit for a while, but you can't fake the ability to consistently produce innovative work. Phoenix's marketing community is smaller than people realize, and reputation matters more than individual wins." "That's actually why I wanted to talk to you," I said, pulling a folder from my bag. "I've been documenting everything about the MedTech project, and I think I have enough evidence to prove what really happened. But I need advice about how to use it without destroying my own career in the process." I showed Lisa the comprehensive file I had assembled over the weekend: research transcripts, email threads, strategy drafts with timestamps, and most importantly, Maria Rodriguez's letter acknowledging my strategic leadership on the campaign. Lisa examined each document carefully, occasionally asking questions about dates and context, her expression growing more focused as she realized the strength of my evidence. "This is incredibly thorough," she said, holding up Maria's letter. "And this letter is particularly damaging to Ashley's version of events. Maria specifically credits you with the innovative thinking that impressed the client. The question is what to do with it. I can't exactly march into David's office and demand credit without looking petty and vindictive." "You're right about that. Direct confrontation would backfire, especially since David seems to have bought into Ashley's narrative completely." Lisa paused, studying the documents again. "But there might be another approach that would be more effective." She explained her thinking with the strategic clarity that had made her such a valuable colleague. "Rather than challenging Ashley's claims within BrightPath, where David's opinion had already been shaped by months of careful manipulation, I should focus on the relationship that actually mattered: my connection with Maria Rodriguez. If Maria understood that she had been misled about who developed the strategy, the client relationship itself would become leverage for restoring my professional standing. The key is that Maria specifically requested to work with you," Lisa pointed out. "If she discovers that you've been marginalized on your own project, she's not going to be happy with BrightPath's handling of the account." "But how do I have that conversation without looking like I'm undermining my own agency?" "You don't approach it as criticism of Ashley or BrightPath. You frame it as wanting to ensure clear communication and proper implementation of the strategic vision. Maria already wrote to you praising your innovative thinking. You have every right to maintain direct contact with a client who specifically valued your contributions." The approach felt risky but logical. Instead of fighting Ashley's narrative within the agency, I would focus on preserving the client relationship that had been built on my work. If Maria understood the true situation, she would likely insist on working directly with me during implementation, which would force David to reconsider the project dynamics. "There's something else you should know," Lisa said, lowering her voice even though we were the only customers in our section of the coffee shop. "Ashley's reputation preceded her when she came to Phoenix. I heard from colleagues in Los Angeles that she left her previous agency under circumstances that weren't entirely voluntary. I know. I did some research over the weekend and found a pattern of similar behavior." "Good. That means you understand that this isn't personal. It's how she operates." But it also means she's made enemies in other markets. And those connections could be useful if this situation escalates. Lisa explained that Desert Digital maintained relationships with several Los Angeles agencies, including the firm where Ashley had previously worked. If necessary, she could facilitate conversations with people who had witnessed Ashley's behavior firsthand, providing additional context about her methods and reputation. The healthcare marketing community is particularly close-knit, Lisa continued. When word gets out about what Ashley did, and it will get out, it's going to damage her credibility in ways that go far beyond this specific project. I don't want to destroy her career. I just want credit for my own work. I understand that, and it speaks well of your character. But you need to understand that Ashley made a choice when she decided to steal your strategy. She gambled that you would be too intimidated or too professional to fight back aggressively. If you prove her wrong, the consequences are on her, not on you. We spent another hour developing a detailed plan for re-establishing my relationship with Maria Rodriguez while documenting Ashley's pattern of credit theft. Lisa agreed to serve as a witness to Ashley's previous behavior at BrightPath and to facilitate introductions with Los Angeles contacts if the situation required additional evidence. As we prepared to leave, Lisa made one final observation that would prove prophetic in the weeks ahead. The thing about people like Ashley is that they're usually smart enough to succeed honestly, but they choose manipulation because it feels easier than real work. Eventually, that choice catches up with them, because they build their careers on foundations that can't support the weight of genuine scrutiny. That afternoon, I returned to the office with a new sense of direction and purpose. Ashley was at her desk, reviewing what appeared to be implementation timelines for the Health Connect campaign, completely unaware that her carefully constructed narrative was about to face its first serious challenge. She looked up as I passed, offering the same bright smile that had once seemed collegial, but now felt like a performance designed to maintain her facade of collaborative leadership. Jessica, perfect timing. I was just reviewing the implementation schedule with the creative team. Do you have a few minutes to discuss the research methodology for the influencer outreach phase? The request was perfectly crafted to reinforce her position as project leader while positioning me as a specialist in data collection and analysis. 6 months ago, I would have been grateful for the inclusion and eager to contribute whatever support she needed. Now I recognize the interaction as another piece of the manipulation that had already cost me so much. Actually, I've been thinking about the client relationship management for this project, I replied, keeping my tone casual and professional. Since Maria Rodriguez specifically requested my involvement, I think it would be valuable for me to maintain direct communication with her during implementation. Something flickered across Ashley's expression, too brief to interpret, but definitely not the enthusiasm I would have expected from a collaborative colleague. That's thoughtful of you to offer, she said carefully, but I think it's important to maintain clear communication channels with the client. Maria has been working with me as the primary contact, and introducing additional voices might create confusion about project leadership. I don't think there would be any confusion. Maria and I have an established working relationship, and she specifically acknowledged the value of my strategic input in her correspondence. Of course she values your research contributions, Ashley replied, her tone taking on the slightly patronizing quality that had become familiar. But client relationship management requires a different skill set than analytical work. I think it's better if I continue handling the strategic communications while you focus on the technical implementation. The conversation was a perfect microcosm of how Ashley had managed to steal credit for my work, positioning herself as the strategic thinker while reducing my role to technical support, using language that sounded collaborative while actually being dismissive, and always framing her control as what was best for the project rather than what was best for her career. I appreciate your perspective, I said, but I think I'll reach out to Maria directly to clarify expectations for the implementation phase. Since this is my strategic work, I want to ensure that the client's vision is properly executed. For the first time since I had known her, Ashley looked genuinely uncomfortable. The mask of friendly collaboration slipped just enough for me to see something harder and more calculating underneath. Jessica, I think that could send the wrong message to the client about our internal coordination. Maybe we should discuss this with David before making any changes to the communication structure. That's a good idea, I agreed, though I had no intention of allowing David to mediate a conversation about my own client relationships. In the meantime, I'll prepare some thoughts about how to best serve Maria's needs during implementation. I spent the rest of the afternoon crafting an email to Maria Rodriguez that would re-establish our direct communication without explicitly criticizing Ashley or BrightPath. The message needed to be professional and strategic, focused on ensuring successful implementation rather than relitigating project ownership. After several drafts, I settled on an approach that emphasized my commitment to the innovative vision we had developed together, while positioning continued collaboration as essential for achieving the campaign's ambitious goals. The email was brief but carefully worded. Maria, I wanted to personally follow up on our Health Connect strategy now that we're moving into implementation. The innovative approach we developed together represents such a significant opportunity to reshape medical device marketing that I want to ensure every detail is executed with the precision it deserves. I'd love to schedule a brief call to discuss how I can best support the implementation process and address any technical questions that arise as we bring this vision to life. I read the message 3 times before sending it, making sure that every word reinforced my role as the strategic architect while positioning continued involvement as beneficial for the client rather than necessary for my ego. The email established direct communication without undermining Ashley explicitly, but it also made clear that I viewed myself as the primary strategic resource for the project. Maria's response came within 2 hours, and it was everything I had hoped for. Jessica, I'm so glad you reached out. I've been hoping to maintain direct communication with you throughout implementation, given your deep understanding of the strategic foundation. Would you be available for a call tomorrow afternoon? I have some specific questions about the influencer selection criteria and measurement framework that I think you're best positioned to address. The email was validation that Maria Rodriguez viewed me as the strategic expert on the project, not just a research assistant providing analytical support. More importantly, it established a direct communication channel that Ashley couldn't control or monitor, giving me the foundation for rebuilding my role in the implementation process. I forwarded Maria's email to Ashley with a brief note. Looks like Maria has some specific questions about the strategic framework. I'll handle this call and keep you updated on any implementation adjustments that come out of our discussion. Ashley's response was swift and carefully neutral. Thanks for handling that technical discussion. Please make sure to loop me in on any client feedback that might affect the overall project direction. The exchange was polite and professional on the surface, but underneath it was a clear power struggle over who would control the client relationship going forward. Ashley was trying to maintain her position as project leader while allowing me to handle the technical aspects that she couldn't manage effectively. I was positioning myself as the strategic expert whose input was essential for successful implementation. That evening, I prepared for the call with Maria Rodriguez, with the intensity of someone whose entire career depended on a single conversation. I reviewed every detail of the Health Connect strategy, prepared answers for technical questions that might arise, and developed talking points that would reinforce my role as the strategic architect without explicitly undermining Ashley's position. The call was scheduled for 2 o'clock the following afternoon, and I knew that the next 24 hours would determine whether I could reclaim my professional standing or whether Ashley's version of events would become permanently embedded in the official record. As I fell asleep that night, I thought about Lisa's observation that talent always surfaces eventually in Phoenix's tight-knit marketing community. I was about to test that theory in the most direct way possible, and the results would either validate my belief in the power of honest work or confirm that manipulation and politics were the only reliable paths to success in the corporate world. The next morning, I arrived at the office early and spent the first 2 hours reviewing every document related to the Health Connect project, preparing for a conversation that could reshape my entire career. Ashley was unusually quiet, avoiding eye contact and focusing intently on her computer screen in a way that suggested she understood the stakes of my upcoming call with Maria Rodriguez. At exactly 2 o'clock, I closed my office door and dialed Maria's number, ready to either reclaim my professional identity or lose it completely. Maria Rodriguez's voice carried the kind of authority that comes from years of making difficult decisions in high-pressure environments. Even through the phone, I could sense her focus and intelligence, the same qualities that had made our initial conversation 2 years ago so memorable. But today there was something else in her tone, a hint of frustration that suggested she had been dealing with complications that she hadn't expected when she hired BrightPath for the Health Connect campaign. Jessica, I'm glad we finally have a chance to talk directly. I've been getting mixed messages about the implementation timeline, and I need clarity about who's actually managing the strategic aspects of this project. My heart raced as I realized that Maria had already noticed inconsistencies in the communication she was receiving from Ashley. This was exactly the opening I had hoped for, but it required careful handling to avoid appearing unprofessional or vindictive. I'm happy to clarify anything that seems confusing, I replied, keeping my voice steady and professional. What specific concerns do you have about the timeline? Well, yesterday I received an email from Ashley Chen about modifying the influencer selection criteria, but her suggestions don't align with the strategic framework we discussed. When I asked her to explain the reasoning behind the changes, she seemed uncertain about the foundational research that supported our original approach. I felt a surge of vindication mixed with concern. Ashley was already struggling to manage implementation of a strategy she didn't understand, which could jeopardize the entire campaign if left uncorrected. The influencer selection criteria were based on specific engagement patterns we identified during the patient interview phase, I explained. Would it be helpful if I walked you through the research methodology that led to those recommendations? Yes, that would be extremely helpful. And Jessica, I want to be direct about something. When I hired BrightPath for this project, I specifically requested that you lead the strategic development because of the innovative thinking you demonstrated at the Southwest Healthcare Marketing Conference. I assumed you were managing the implementation process, but my recent interactions suggest that Ashley is now the primary contact. The moment felt surreal. Maria Rodriguez was essentially asking me to explain why I had been marginalized on my own project. But she was doing it in a way that positioned me as the expert whose input she valued most. This was the validation I had been hoping for, but it also put me in the delicate position of having to navigate between honesty and professionalism. There may have been some internal confusion about project roles, I said carefully. Ashley has been managing client communications, but I developed the strategic framework, and I'm certainly available to handle any technical questions about implementation. Technical questions? Maria's tone sharpened. Jessica, what you created isn't technical support work. It's innovative strategic thinking that could reshape how medical device companies approach their target markets. I need to understand what's happening with project management, because if you're not leading implementation, I'm concerned about our ability to execute this vision effectively. The conversation was moving in exactly the direction I had hoped, but faster than I had anticipated. Maria Rodriguez was essentially forcing a confrontation about project ownership, and her clear preference for working with me directly was creating leverage I hadn't expected to have. I share your commitment to executing this vision successfully, I replied. Perhaps we should schedule a more comprehensive discussion about implementation approach and team coordination. I want to make sure we're using all available resources effectively. I think that's an excellent idea, but Jessica, I need to ask you directly, are you the person who developed the Health Connect strategy? Because if you are, then you're the person I need to be working with throughout implementation. The question hung in the air, demanding a level of honesty that could either restore my professional standing or create a crisis that would end my career at BrightPath. I thought about my mother's words about choosing who I wanted to be, about Lisa's advice that talent always surfaces eventually, and about the months of work that Ashley had claimed as her own. Yes, I said simply. I developed the Health Connect strategy. Every element of the campaign approach, from the patient research methodology to the influencer program design, originated from my work over the past 4 months. I thought so. The strategic thinking and attention to detail matched exactly what I remembered from your previous presentations. Jessica, I need you to understand something. MedTech hired BrightPath specifically to work with you. If there are internal politics affecting your ability to manage this project, we need to address that immediately. The validation was overwhelming, but it also created a responsibility that felt enormous. Maria Rodriguez was not just acknowledging my work, she was indicating that the entire client relationship depended on my involvement. This gave me leverage within BrightPath, but it also meant that any mistake in handling the situation could result in losing our biggest client. I appreciate your confidence in my work, I said. What would be most helpful for ensuring successful implementation going forward? I'd like to schedule a meeting with you and your agency leadership to clarify project roles and establish clear communication protocols. This campaign is too important for MedTech to risk confusion about who's responsible for strategic oversight. After we ended the call, I sat in my office processing what had just occurred. In 20 minutes, Maria Rodriguez had essentially validated everything I had been trying to prove about my role in developing the Health Connect strategy. More importantly, she had positioned herself as an advocate for my involvement, creating external pressure that David would find difficult to ignore. I spent the rest of the afternoon preparing for what I knew would be a challenging conversation with David about project management and client expectations. Maria's request for a meeting with agency leadership was essentially forcing a reckoning about Ashley's version of events, but it also gave me an opportunity to present my evidence in a context where client satisfaction was the primary concern. The next morning, I knocked on David's office door with a folder containing my comprehensive documentation and a printed copy of Maria's email requesting clarification about project roles. His expression when I entered suggested that he was already anticipating a difficult conversation, though I suspected he didn't fully understand how fundamentally the dynamics were about to shift. David, I need to discuss the MedTech project management structure. Maria Rodriguez has requested a meeting to clarify team roles and communication protocols. He leaned back in his chair, studying my face with the kind of expression that managers use when they're trying to assess whether a situation is manageable or catastrophic. What kind of clarification is she looking for? She's concerned about inconsistencies in the implementation approach and wants to ensure that the person who developed the strategic framework is directly involved in execution oversight. Ashley has been managing the client relationship effectively. What specific concerns did Maria raise? This was the moment where I had to present my evidence without appearing to undermine Ashley directly, while also making clear that the client relationship itself was at risk if the situation wasn't addressed properly. Maria specifically requested that I lead the implementation because she believes I developed the strategic approach. She indicated that her decision to hire BrightPath was based on wanting to work with me directly on this project. David's expression shifted from mild concern to something closer to alarm, as he realized that our biggest client was essentially questioning the project management structure that he had endorsed. "Show me exactly what she said." I handed him the printed email where Maria had requested our meeting, along with her earlier letter acknowledging my strategic leadership on the campaign. As he read the documents, I could see him processing the implications of having a major client specifically identify me as the strategic expert when he had been told that Ashley was the project leader. "This is problematic," he said finally. "If the client expects you to be leading implementation but Ashley has been managing the relationship, we have a serious coordination issue." "I think the problem goes deeper than coordination," I replied, opening my folder to reveal the comprehensive documentation I had assembled. "I'd like to show you the evidence that demonstrates my role in developing the Health Connect strategy." For the next 30 minutes, I walked David through the timeline of project development, showing him research transcripts, email threads, strategy drafts, and the technical documentation that proved my central role in creating every element of the campaign. I presented the evidence methodically and professionally, focusing on facts rather than emotions, and letting the documentation speak for itself about who had actually developed the work. David's expression grew increasingly serious as he realized the scope of what he was seeing. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. I had created the Health Connect strategy, while Ashley had managed communications and positioning herself to claim credit for my work. "Jessica, this documentation suggests that you were the primary strategic architect of this campaign. Why didn't you present this information when we discussed project roles previously?" I tried to explain my role in creating the strategy, but I was told that my contributions were research support rather than strategic development. I didn't want to appear territorial or unprofessional by pushing back more aggressively. "And Ashley knew about your role in developing this work?" "She was involved in every stage of the development process. She attended the client meetings where I presented my research findings, reviewed the strategy documents as I created them, and helped coordinate communication with Maria throughout the project timeline." David was quiet for several minutes, studying the evidence and clearly processing the implications of what he was learning. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that suggested he understood how seriously he had misjudged the situation. This is a significant problem, Jessica. If our client specifically hired us to work with you, and we've been representing Ashley as the strategic leader, we've created a credibility issue that could jeopardize the entire relationship. What do you think we should do to address Maria's concerns? We need to have an immediate conversation with Ashley about project roles and client communication. And we need to schedule that meeting with Maria Rodriguez to clarify how we're going to manage implementation going forward. The conversation with Ashley took place that afternoon in David's office, with me present to provide context about the client's expectations and concerns. Ashley arrived looking confident and slightly annoyed, clearly expecting to address some minor coordination issues rather than face a fundamental challenge to her version of events. Ashley, David began, we've received feedback from Maria Rodriguez about some confusion regarding project management and strategic oversight. She's specifically requested that Jessica take the lead on implementation because she believes Jessica developed the strategic framework. I watched Ashley's expression carefully as David spoke, seeing the moment when she realized that her carefully constructed narrative was facing serious scrutiny. Her initial confidence faltered just slightly, before she recovered, with the smooth professionalism that had served her so well throughout the manipulation process. I think there may be some misunderstanding about the collaborative nature of strategy development, Ashley replied. Jessica certainly contributed valuable research to the project, and I've always acknowledged her analytical work. But the client relationship and strategic oversight require a broader perspective than data collection and analysis. Actually, I said, presenting Maria's letter that specifically credited me with innovative strategic thinking, Maria has been clear about viewing me as the strategic architect of the campaign. This letter, sent 3 weeks into the project, acknowledges my role in developing the creative approach and patient storytelling framework. Ashley read the letter, and for the first time since I had known her, she looked genuinely uncertain about how to respond. The evidence was too specific and too damaging to dismiss, but acknowledging its implications would require admitting that she had misrepresented her role in the project development. Of course, Maria appreciated Jessica's research contributions, she said finally, but strategy development involves much more than individual research insights. The client may not fully understand the collaborative process that goes into campaign creation. The client understands perfectly, David replied, his tone growing firmer. She hired BrightPath specifically to work with Jessica on this project, and she's requesting clarification about why Jessica isn't leading implementation. Ashley, I need you to explain how this situation developed. The room fell silent as Ashley realized that her usual techniques for deflecting responsibility weren't going to work in this context. David had seen the evidence, Maria Rodriguez was demanding answers, and I was present to provide documentation that contradicted any alternative version of events she might try to construct. I think there may have been some miscommunication about project roles, she said carefully. I was focused on client relationship management, and perhaps I wasn't clear enough about Jessica's strategic contributions when I communicated with you about project progress. Ashley, David said, I'm looking at 4 months of documentation that shows Jessica developing every element of this strategy. What I need to understand is how I came to believe that you were the strategic leader when the evidence suggests otherwise. The question forced Ashley into a corner where she couldn't avoid taking responsibility for the misrepresentation without admitting to deliberate deception. She attempted several explanations that didn't align with the documented timeline, each one making her appear either incompetent or dishonest. Finally, David made the decision that restored my professional standing and effectively ended Ashley's career at BrightPath. Based on this evidence and the client's expectations, Jessica will take over as lead strategist for the MedTech implementation, with direct responsibility for client relationship management and strategic oversight. Ashley, we need to discuss your role on other projects and your approach to team collaboration. The meeting with Maria Rodriguez the following week was a complete vindication of everything I had been trying to prove about my capabilities and contributions. She was effusive in her praise for the strategic framework, excited about the implementation approach, and clear about her relief that I would be managing the project directly. Jessica, I have to tell you how pleased I am that we've clarified the project management structure. The Health Connect campaign represents exactly the kind of innovative thinking that MedTech was hoping to find, and I'm confident that with you leading implementation, we're going to achieve something remarkable. But the conversation that mattered most happened 2 weeks later, when Lisa Thompson called to tell me that Desert Digital was looking for a senior strategy director with expertise in healthcare marketing, and that my work on the Health Connect campaign had created exactly the kind of industry recognition that opens doors to bigger opportunities. Jessica, what you've built with the MedTech project is getting attention throughout the Phoenix marketing community. The word is that you've developed something genuinely innovative in medical device marketing, and agencies are starting to compete for that kind of strategic thinking. The job offer from Desert Digital was everything I had been working toward: senior-level responsibility, a significant salary increase, and the kind of professional recognition that would provide long-term security for my family. More importantly, it was validation that my years of dedicated work and ethical behavior had created a foundation that could support real career advancement. Ashley's departure from BrightPath happened quietly, with the kind of mutual agreement that allows people to save face while acknowledging that a working relationship has become untenable. But the whispers throughout Phoenix's marketing community were less diplomatic. Word spread quickly about the MedTech situation, and Ashley's pattern of credit theft became an open secret that effectively ended her viability in the local market. 6 months later, I was sitting in my new corner office at Desert Digital, reviewing proposals for 3 major healthcare clients who had specifically requested to work with me based on the success of the Health Connect campaign. The financial security I had been desperately seeking was finally real, allowing me to focus on my mother's care without the constant anxiety about medical expenses and long-term planning. But the victory that meant the most came on a quiet Tuesday evening, when my mother, during one of her increasingly rare moments of complete clarity, looked at me with the pride that had motivated my entire career. "Mija, I'm proud of how you handled that difficult situation at work. You stood up for yourself without losing your integrity, and you proved that doing the right thing eventually leads to the right results." The Health Connect campaign launched 3 months ahead of schedule and exceeded every performance metric we had established during the planning phase. The innovative approach to patient storytelling and influencer partnerships became a case study that other medical device companies began requesting, establishing me as a recognized expert in healthcare marketing strategy. Maria Rodriguez and I maintained our professional relationship, with MedTech becoming my first major client at Desert Digital. The success of our continued collaboration opened doors throughout the medical device industry, creating opportunities that transformed my career trajectory in ways I had never imagined possible. Ashley never found another position in Phoenix's marketing community. The pattern of credit theft that I had documented became widely known throughout the industry, creating a reputation that made her unemployable in any agency that valued ethical collaboration. 6 months after leaving BrightPath, she relocated to Seattle, though I heard from colleagues that her reputation had preceded her there as well. The most satisfying moment came almost a year later, when I was invited to speak at the Southwest Healthcare Marketing Conference about innovative approaches to patient engagement. Standing at the same podium where I had first met Maria Rodriguez, I presented the Health Connect case study to an audience of industry professionals who were eager to understand how authentic storytelling could reshape medical device marketing. In the question and answer session afterward, a young marketing coordinator approached me with the kind of eager enthusiasm that reminded me of my own early career aspirations. "Ms. Martinez, I'm working on a campaign that could really benefit from the patient interview methodology you described. Would you be willing to share some advice about building authentic relationships with patient advocates?" As I answered her question, I thought about all the young professionals who were just beginning their careers, trying to navigate the complex dynamics of corporate politics while maintaining their integrity and pursuing meaningful work. I remembered my own struggles with self-doubt and the temptation to accept diminished recognition rather than fight for what I had earned. "The most important thing to remember," I told her, "is that your work speaks for itself if you document it properly and maintain relationships based on genuine value rather than political positioning. Excellence is its own protection, but only if you're willing to advocate for yourself when it matters most." That evening, I drove home through the Phoenix desert, thinking about the journey that had brought me from desperate financial anxiety to professional recognition and personal satisfaction. The path had required more courage than I thought I possessed, but it had also revealed strengths that I hadn't known existed. My mother was waiting in our living room, watching her evening news program with the volume turned up just slightly too loud. Her condition had progressed over the past year, but the financial security from my new position meant that she received the best possible care without the constant stress that had defined our previous situation. "How was your day, Mija?" "It was good, Mom, really good." She patted the couch beside her, and I settled in for our nightly routine of shared silence and quiet companionship. Outside our window, the desert stretched toward mountains that glowed purple and gold in the sunset, beautiful and permanent, in a way that reminded me that some battles are worth fighting, some victories are worth the risk, and some stories are worth telling. The notification on my phone indicated a new email from a Fortune 500 medical device company requesting a consultation about their upcoming product launch strategy. The recognition I had been seeking for years was now a regular part of my professional life, but it felt different than I had expected, more like validation of capabilities I had always possessed rather than achievement of something new. Ashley Chen had taught me an important lesson about the difference between taking what you want and earning what you deserve. She had chosen manipulation over merit, politics over performance, and short-term advantage over long-term reputation. Those choices had provided temporary success, but ultimately created a foundation too weak to support sustained achievement. I had chosen differently, and while the path had been more difficult and uncertain, it had led to something she could never steal: genuine expertise, earned respect, and the kind of professional satisfaction that comes from building something valuable rather than simply claiming credit for someone else's work. As I prepared for sleep that night, I reflected on the year that had transformed my career and my understanding of my own capabilities. The woman who had sat in silence while Ashley presented her strategy to Maria Rodriguez felt like a different person, someone who had been diminished by fear and uncertainty into accepting less than she deserved. The woman who now led strategy development for multiple Fortune 500 clients understood that advocacy for your own work isn't arrogance, it's responsibility. That documentation isn't paranoia, it's professionalism. That standing up for your contributions isn't selfish. It's necessary for maintaining the integrity that makes meaningful work possible. 6 months later, Ashley Chen's name appeared in a news article about a lawsuit filed by a Seattle marketing agency against a former employee for misrepresentation of credentials and project ownership. The details were different, but the pattern was identical: systematic credit theft, manipulation of client relationships, and ultimate exposure when the evidence became overwhelming. I felt no satisfaction in reading about her downfall, but I did feel validation that my decision to fight back had been necessary and appropriate. Ashley's story was a cautionary tale about the inevitable consequences of building a career on deception, while my story had become something different. A reminder that talent, persistence, and integrity create foundations strong enough to support genuine success. The last time I thought about Ashley Chen was during a team meeting at Desert Digital, when one of our junior strategists asked for advice about handling a situation where a colleague was taking credit for her ideas. I looked at this young woman, seeing my own earlier confusion and frustration reflected in her expression, and realized that my experience had given me something valuable to share. "Document everything," I told her. "Maintain direct relationships with clients who value your work. Trust that excellence creates its own opportunities. And remember that people who steal credit can only succeed when talented people accept diminished recognition, rather than advocating for what they've earned." The advice wasn't revolutionary, but it was hard-won through experience that had tested every assumption I had about fairness, merit, and justice in professional environments. Ashley Chen had inadvertently given me a gift: the knowledge that I possessed both the capabilities and the courage necessary to build a career worthy of my efforts and aspirations. That knowledge had proven more valuable than any individual project victory, because it had transformed my understanding of my own worth and my willingness to fight for the recognition that makes meaningful work possible. 2 years after the Health Connect campaign transformed my career, I found myself sitting in the executive conference room at Desert Digital, reviewing quarterly performance reports that exceeded every projection we had made when I joined the agency. The Healthcare Marketing Division 1, now led, had grown from a modest specialty practice to the most profitable segment of the company, with a client roster that included 6 of the top 10 medical device manufacturers in North America. The success felt surreal sometimes, like stepping into a life that had been designed for someone with more confidence and ambition than I had ever possessed. My assistant knocked on the door and entered with the kind of expression that suggested important news was arriving. "Jessica, there's a call from Rebecca Martinez at the Healthcare Marketing Institute. She says it's about the Ethics Committee investigation you've been following." The Healthcare Marketing Institute was the industry's primary professional organization, responsible for establishing standards and investigating complaints about unethical practices. 6 months earlier, I had been contacted by their ethics committee about Ashley Chen, who had apparently been reported by multiple agencies across different markets for pattern credit theft and professional misrepresentation. My documentation from the BrightPath situation had become part of a comprehensive investigation that was reshaping how the industry addressed workplace manipulation and intellectual property theft. "Put her through," I said, settling back in my chair to receive what I suspected would be significant news about the investigation's conclusions. Rebecca Martinez had been leading the ethics committee for 8 years, with a reputation for thorough investigations and fair but decisive recommendations. Her voice carried the authority of someone who had spent decades navigating complex professional disputes and establishing precedents that would guide industry behavior for years to come. "Jessica, I'm calling to update you on the Ashley Chen investigation and to thank you for the comprehensive documentation you provided. Your evidence was instrumental in establishing the pattern of behavior that formed the foundation of our findings." "What did the committee conclude?" "We've issued formal censure recommendations to 3 agencies where Ashley misrepresented her contributions to major projects. More significantly, we've established new guidelines for project attribution and client communication that are directly based on the issues your case highlighted." The news was gratifying, but it also felt like validation that the painful experience at BrightPath had contributed to something larger than my individual career recovery. The Ethics Committee's investigation had revealed that Ashley's pattern of credit theft was more extensive than anyone had realized, affecting colleagues and clients across multiple markets, and creating industry-wide awareness about the need for better documentation and accountability standards. "There's something else," Rebecca continued. "The Institute is planning a session on professional ethics and intellectual property protection at this year's annual conference. We'd like you to present your case as an example of how proper documentation and client relationship management can protect both individual professionals and agency integrity." The invitation to speak at the Healthcare Marketing Institute's national conference represented the kind of industry recognition that I had never imagined achieving. The annual conference attracted over 2,000 marketing professionals from across the country, including senior executives, agency founders, and thought leaders who shaped the direction of healthcare communications. Being selected to present meant that my experience had become a teaching tool that could help other professionals avoid similar manipulation and advocate more effectively for their own contributions. "I'd be honored to participate," I replied, though the prospect of presenting such personal material to a national audience felt both exciting and terrifying. "Excellent. We're particularly interested in your perspective on how to build client relationships that protect strategic ownership while maintaining collaborative team dynamics. Your work with MedTech has become a case study that other agencies are trying to replicate." After ending the call, I sat in my office processing the realization that the worst professional experience of my life had somehow evolved into industry leadership and educational content that could benefit thousands of other marketing professionals. The transformation felt almost too dramatic to believe, but the evidence was undeniable. The Health Connect campaign had established my reputation as an expert in medical device marketing. The Ashley Chen investigation had positioned me as an advocate for professional ethics, and my current role at Desert Digital had proven that authentic expertise creates sustainable career advancement. That afternoon, I drove to my mother's new assisted living facility for our weekly lunch together. Carmen had moved to Desert Gardens 6 months earlier, when her dementia progressed to the point where she needed more supervision than I could provide while maintaining my professional responsibilities. The facility was expensive but exceptional, with specialized programs for memory care and staff who understood how to maintain dignity and engagement, even as cognitive abilities declined. My mother was waiting in the dining room when I arrived, dressed in the lavender sweater I had given her for Christmas, and looking more alert than she had been during my previous visit. Her good days were becoming less frequent, but when they occurred, she was still capable of the insight and wisdom that had guided my entire life. Mija, you look different today. Happy, but also thoughtful. I got some interesting news about the workplace situation I told you about. The professional organization completed their investigation, and they want me to speak at their national conference about what happened. She nodded slowly, processing the information with the careful attention she still brought to important conversations. That's wonderful, honey, but how do you feel about talking publicly about such a difficult experience? The question was characteristically perceptive. My mother had always understood that professional success and personal satisfaction were different achievements, and that external recognition didn't automatically resolve the emotional complexity of workplace betrayal and recovery. I feel ready to help other people avoid what I went through, I said. And I think I've learned enough about handling these situations that I can offer genuinely useful advice. What would you tell someone who's facing the same kind of problem you faced? I considered the question carefully, thinking about all the young professionals I had mentored over the past 2 years, and the patterns I had observed in workplace dynamics throughout the healthcare marketing industry. I'd tell them that documentation isn't paranoia, it's professionalism. That client relationships built on genuine value create protection that office politics can't destroy. And that standing up for your work isn't selfish. It's necessary for maintaining the integrity that makes meaningful collaboration possible. My mother smiled with the kind of satisfaction that suggested she recognized her own values reflected in my response. You've learned important lessons, Jessica, and now you can help other people learn them without having to suffer through the same experience. The conversation reminded me why fighting for professional recognition had been about more than individual career advancement. The principles at stake, honest collaboration, fair attribution, ethical client relationships, were foundational to creating workplace environments where talented people could thrive without constantly defending their contributions or accepting diminished recognition for their efforts. 3 weeks later, I received an email that would fundamentally change how I understood the long-term impact of the Ashley Chen situation. The message came from Sarah Williams, a marketing coordinator at a Chicago healthcare agency, and the subject line read, "Thank you for saving my career." Sarah explained that she had been facing credit theft from a senior colleague who was systematically claiming her campaign ideas and client insights. The situation had escalated to the point where Sarah was considering leaving the industry entirely, convinced that manipulation and politics were inevitable aspects of marketing careers that she wasn't equipped to handle. Then I heard about your experience through professional networks, Sarah wrote. The story gave me hope that there were ways to fight back effectively, and more importantly, it showed me that documenting my work and maintaining direct client relationships weren't defensive measures. They were professional best practices that I should have been following all along. Sarah had implemented the documentation and relationship management strategies that I had developed during my own situation, successfully exposing her colleagues' pattern of credit theft and securing recognition for her innovative campaign development. The parallels to my experience were striking, but what impressed me most was how Sarah had applied the lessons proactively rather than reactively, preventing the kind of extensive damage that I had endured before fighting back. Your story proved that talent and integrity can triumph over manipulation, she concluded, but only if you're willing to advocate for yourself strategically rather than hoping that fairness will automatically prevail. The email was the first of dozens I would receive over the following months from marketing professionals who had heard about my experience through industry networks and applied similar strategies to protect their own work and advance their careers. Each story was unique, but the patterns were consistent. Systematic documentation, direct client relationship management, and strategic confrontation when necessary had proven effective across different agencies, markets, and types of professional manipulation. The response confirmed that Ashley Chen's approach to credit theft was not an isolated phenomenon, but a recognizable pattern that many professionals encountered during their careers. More encouraging was the evidence that the strategies I had developed for combating manipulation were replicable and effective when applied by people with different backgrounds and career stages. 6 months before the Healthcare Marketing Institute conference, I began developing my presentation with the intensity that I had once devoted to the Health Connect campaign strategy. The goal was not simply to tell my story, but but to create a comprehensive framework that other professionals could use to protect their intellectual property, build authentic client relationships, and advocate effectively for their contributions. The presentation took shape around 3 core principles that had emerged from my experience and subsequent mentoring relationships: proactive documentation as professional protection, authentic relationship building as career foundation, and strategic advocacy as personal responsibility. Each principle was supported by case studies, practical implementation strategies, and tools that attendees could immediately apply to their own workplace situations. But the most important element of the presentation was the perspective that I had gained about the broader implications of workplace manipulation and credit theft. Ashley's behavior hadn't just damaged individual careers. It had created toxic dynamics that undermined collaboration, discouraged innovation, and reduced overall team effectiveness. Fighting back against manipulation wasn't just about personal justice. It was about maintaining professional environments where genuine talent could flourish. The night before my presentation at the Healthcare Marketing Institute conference, I had dinner with Lisa Thompson, who had traveled to San Diego to attend my session and celebrate how far both our careers had progressed since our coffee shop conversation 2 years earlier. Lisa was now Director of Strategic Development at Desert Digital, having joined the agency 6 months after I did, and our professional partnership had become one of the most rewarding aspects of my career advancement. "I have to admit," Lisa said over wine and seafood overlooking the Pacific Ocean, "when you first told me about the Ashley situation, I wasn't sure you had the political instincts to fight back effectively. You were so focused on the work itself rather than the relationships and positioning that determine how work gets credited." "I learned that the work and the relationships aren't separate things," I replied. "The most effective protection for your contributions comes from building authentic connections with people who understand and value what you're creating. And now you're going to teach 2,000 marketing professionals how to do the same thing." The prospect still felt surreal, but I was genuinely excited about the opportunity to share insights that could prevent other people from experiencing the kind of professional devastation that Ashley had inflicted. The conference presentation would be the culmination of a journey that had transformed not just my career, but my understanding of how talent, integrity, and strategic thinking could create sustainable success in competitive professional environments. The next morning, I stood backstage at the San Diego Convention Center, reviewing my notes one final time before walking onto a stage in front of the largest audience I had ever addressed. The presentation was scheduled for the main auditorium during the peak attendance period, indicating that the conference organizers expected significant interest in the topic of professional ethics and intellectual property protection. As I stepped onto the stage and looked out at the audience of marketing professionals, I thought about how dramatically my life had changed since that December morning, when Ashley Chen presented my strategy to Maria Rodriguez as her own work. The woman who had sat in silence while her career was stolen would never have imagined herself as a keynote speaker at the industry's premier conference. But the journey from victim to advocate had revealed capabilities and courage that I hadn't known I possessed. 2 years ago, I began. I thought my career was over. A colleague had stolen months of my work, convinced my boss that she was the strategic genius, and reduced me to a research assistant on my own project. I was ready to accept that manipulation and politics were just inevitable parts of professional life, that I wasn't sophisticated enough to navigate successfully. The audience was immediately attentive, recognizing the universal themes of workplace betrayal and professional vulnerability that most people encounter at some point in their careers. But what I learned over the following months changed not just my career trajectory, but my understanding of how authentic expertise creates its own protection when it's properly documented and strategically communicated. The person who tried to destroy my reputation ultimately provided me with the most valuable education I've ever received about professional advocacy and relationship management. I spent the next 40 minutes walking the audience through the comprehensive framework I had developed for protecting intellectual property and building sustainable career advancement. The response was overwhelming, with attendees taking detailed notes, asking pointed questions, and requesting copies of the documentation templates and relationship management strategies that I had created. But the moment that mattered most came during the question and answer session, when a young marketing coordinator raised her hand and asked, "What would you say to someone who's currently experiencing credit theft but is afraid that fighting back will damage their reputation or career prospects. The question transported me back to my own fear and uncertainty during the darkest period of the Ashley Chen situation, when I had been convinced that challenging her version of events would appear petty and vindictive rather than professional and justified. I would tell them that your reputation is already being damaged by allowing someone else to claim credit for your work, I replied. The question isn't whether to advocate for yourself, but how to do it strategically and effectively. Documentation and authentic client relationships create leverage that manipulation can't overcome, but only if you're willing to use that leverage when it becomes necessary. The response generated sustained applause from an audience that clearly recognized the relevance of the advice to their own professional challenges. After the session ended, I was approached by dozens of conference attendees who shared their own experiences with credit theft, workplace manipulation, and the challenge of maintaining integrity while advancing their careers in competitive environments. The conversations reinforced my understanding that Ashley Chen's behavior represented a widespread problem rather than an isolated incident, and that the strategies I had developed for combating manipulation could benefit far more people than I had initially realized. The conference presentation had transformed my personal experience into educational content that could create positive change throughout the healthcare marketing industry. 6 months after the conference, I received a call from the Harvard Business School Alumni Association requesting permission to include my case study in their curriculum on organizational behavior and professional ethics. The request represented the kind of academic recognition that I had never imagined achieving, but it also confirmed that the lessons from the Ashley Chen situation had broader applicability beyond the marketing industry. Your experience illustrates several key principles about workplace dynamics and professional advocacy that we think MBA students need to understand before entering competitive corporate environments, explained Dr. Patricia Chen, the professor who had developed the curriculum. The documentation strategies, relationship management techniques, and confrontation approaches you used provide a comprehensive framework for protecting intellectual property while maintaining collaborative team dynamics. The irony of having my professional triumph included in Harvard Business School curriculum was not lost on me, particularly since Ashley had often mentioned her MBA credentials as evidence of her superior strategic thinking capabilities. The academic recognition validated that authentic expertise and ethical behavior create more sustainable career foundations than manipulation and credit theft, regardless of educational background or political sophistication. But the achievement that meant the most came on a quiet Tuesday evening 6 months later, when I received a handwritten letter from Maria Rodriguez announcing her promotion to Chief Marketing Officer at MedTech Innovations and thanking me for the partnership that had launched her own career advancement. Jessica, the Health Connect campaign continues to serve as the model for all our product launches, Maria wrote. The innovative approach you developed has become our competitive advantage in the medical device market, and the success we've achieved together has been instrumental in my promotion to CMO. More importantly, working with you taught me the importance of authentic collaboration and strategic thinking that prioritizes long-term value over short-term politics. Maria's letter reminded me that the most satisfying aspect of professional success was not individual recognition, but the creation of value that benefited clients, colleagues, and industry standards. The Health Connect campaign had achieved its original objectives of revolutionizing medical device marketing, but it had also established principles of authentic collaboration and strategic innovation that continued to influence how MedTech approached all their subsequent campaigns. The final validation came almost 3 years after the original betrayal, when I received a LinkedIn message from Ashley Chen herself. The message was brief and carefully worded, but it represented the closest thing to an apology that I expected to receive from someone who had built her career on manipulation and credit theft. Jessica, I wanted to reach out to acknowledge that our working relationship at BrightPath became complicated by miscommunications about project roles and responsibilities. I've learned a lot about collaborative dynamics since then, and I hope you've found success in your current position. I respect the professional integrity you've always demonstrated. The message was classic Ashley, carefully crafted to sound conciliatory while avoiding any specific admission of wrongdoing or acceptance of responsibility for the damage she had caused. But the fact that she had reached out at all suggested that her career trajectory had not recovered from the industry awareness about her pattern of credit theft and professional misrepresentation. I chose not to respond to the message, having learned that some situations are better resolved through success rather than reconciliation. Ashley Chen had provided me with an invaluable education about professional advocacy and relationship management. But she had also demonstrated the ultimate futility of building careers on foundations of deception and manipulation. 5 years after the Health Connect campaign, I found myself reviewing annual performance data that showed my healthcare marketing division had become the most profitable segment of Desert Digital, with client retention rates and innovation metrics that exceeded industry benchmarks. The success had created opportunities that continued to surprise me: speaking engagements at conferences across the country, consulting requests from Fortune 500 companies, and mentoring relationships with dozens of young professionals who were building their own careers on principles of authentic expertise and ethical collaboration. But the achievement that mattered most was much simpler and more personal. My mother, despite the progression of her dementia, still had moments of clarity where she recognized my voice and remembered that I had become someone who stood up for herself and helped other people do the same. During one of our recent visits, she had looked at me with the kind of focus that still surfaced occasionally and said, "Mija, I'm proud of the woman you've become. You learned how to be strong without losing your kindness, and that's the most important lesson anyone can master." The observation captured something essential about the journey from victim to advocate that I had experienced over the past 5 years. The challenge had never been simply about fighting back against workplace manipulation, but about maintaining integrity and compassion while developing the strategic thinking and professional courage necessary to protect valuable work and build sustainable career advancement. Ashley Chen had ultimately given me a gift that she never intended: the knowledge that authentic expertise, properly documented and strategically communicated, creates protection that manipulation cannot overcome. That knowledge had transformed not just my career, but my understanding of how talent and integrity can triumph over politics and deception when they're combined with strategic thinking and professional courage. The story that began with stolen credit and career devastation had evolved into industry leadership and educational content that continued to benefit marketing professionals across different markets and career stages. The transformation proved that individual advocacy for professional integrity can create positive change that extends far beyond personal success, establishing standards and expectations that make collaborative excellence more possible for everyone. Looking back on the 5 years since Ashley Chen tried to destroy my career, I realized that she had actually accelerated my professional development in ways that conventional success never could have achieved. The crisis had forced me to develop skills, relationships, and strategic thinking capabilities that now formed the foundation of everything I had built at Desert Digital and throughout the healthcare marketing industry. The woman who had once accepted diminished recognition rather than risk confrontation had become someone who understood that advocacy for your own work is not selfish ambition, but professional responsibility that benefits everyone who values authentic collaboration and ethical business practices. That understanding had proven more valuable than any individual career victory, because it had created a foundation for sustained success that could withstand any future challenges or setbacks. Ashley Chen had taught me that talent without advocacy is vulnerable to exploitation, but she had also demonstrated that manipulation without substance eventually collapses under the weight of genuine scrutiny. The lesson had transformed not just my career but my approach to mentoring, client relationships, and industry leadership. Every presentation I gave, every professional I mentored, and every strategy I developed was informed by the understanding that authentic expertise must be protected through documentation, strategic communication, and the willingness to advocate for what you've earned. 5 years later, that advocacy had created something that Ashley Chen's manipulation never could: a career built on genuine value, authentic relationships, and the kind of professional satisfaction that comes from knowing that your success serves purposes larger than individual advancement. The story that began with betrayal had become a testament to the power of integrity, strategic thinking, and the courage to stand up for what you've built. It was a story worth telling, and more importantly, it was a foundation worth building on for whatever challenges and opportunities lay ahead. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.